Tonight at State Parliament there's a big bash underway as the Australian Labor Party celebrates forming its first government 100 years ago. Labor has ruled this state for 63 of those years, but the paradigm, it seems, may be about to shift. On the count so far, 23 members of State Parliament are departing the political scene in the run-up to the March election, most of them Labor. Some, like heavyweights John Delabosca and Ian MacDonald, have already gone. This week, former Education Minister and Speaker John Aquilina, the longest-serving MP, announced he would not recontest his seat of Riverstone. Also going is Peter Debnam, the member for Vaucluse, who led the coalition at the 2007 state election. Some MPs have reached retirement age, some have had enough. With the latest news polls showing state Labor at an all-time primary vote low of just 23%, some MPs appear to be anticipating the party's defeat next March and jumping now to avoid being rejected by voters. Stateline caught up with one departing MP prepared to go on camera to express his deep disillusionment about his party and the game of politics.
He wants to make a name for himself in News Limited.
No, it's not Frank Sartor, yet. While there's intense speculation that the member for Rockdale, Minister for Climate Change and former Lord Mayor of Sydney will quit state politics, he won't confirm or deny. This week, Mr Sartor defended himself against a Daily Telegraph attack that he'd changed the rules to stop a development dominating his private residence in his electorate. He denied any intervention or misuse of his ministerial powers.
It got approved by who? By me? No. By my department? No. By Cogra Council, who run by Liberals? No. Guess who approved the development? Guess who approved the development? Guess who approved it? Great allies of Frank Sartor. Great. They say lovely things about me every time there's a judgment. Every time. Guess who approved the development? The Land and Environment Court approved this development. The Land and Environment Court. You have shot your bolts up.
There's also speculation that Jodie McKay, the member for Newcastle, and Joe Tripodi, the member for Fairfield, will soon quit, but we don't know for sure. Stateline sought a reflective interview with Peter Debnam, the former opposition leader who led the coalition at the 2007 election. He's been critical of his party's risk-averse tactics in the lead-up to the 2011 election and is concerned that nothing will really change even if the government is removed next March. But Mr Debnam wasn't prepared to go on camera to share his current thoughts.
And I was, to a very large degree, enticed by the philosophy of social justice to join the Labor Party.
But we did find Phil Koperberg, the former Rural Fire Services Commissioner, was prepared to go public. He's departing after only one term as the member for Blue Mountains. He served 1 year in the Yammer Cabinet. He joined the Labor Party just before the 2007 election. He's now deeply disillusioned.
What's wrong is that there's a huge disconnect now between the party machine, those who form the parliamentary party, and those grassroots Labor members, and therefore the ability to exercise common sense and find practical and common sense solutions to issues which are really hurting the public. And I talk of electricity prices, I talk of congestion in the city, I talk of the cost of housing, I talk of many things, the cost of food, which are fundamental to fundamental rights of an egalitarian society. The fight to get those is simply not being handled in the right way. It is a reality that factionalism plays too great a part in the provision of outcome.
We've had a big negative perception about the Labor Party, perhaps being diverted by the influence of property developers through the Wollongong corruption scandal. You've been in caucus through these last 4 years. What impact did that have on the standing of the party?
Well, if I'm going to be perfectly frank, there have been many occasions when I've almost felt ashamed to be a politician. And that's pretty sad in this day and age. And I have, and so have some of my colleagues. They may not admit it, but in private conversation they'll tell you that they feel ashamed to be part of a system which is so poorly regarded by the broader community as to put them somewhere beneath the lowest of professions or occupations. And as Neville Wran once said, if you throw enough mud, some of it will stick. Now, I'm not suggesting for one moment, and nobody in their right mind would, that corruption is rife, because it's not. It's not rife within the Labor Party or anywhere else. But there are elements which will bring the party into disrepute, and that's precisely what happens.
Phil Koperberg is distressed that nothing practical ever seems to be done to address aggressive cost of living increases, which have a devastating impact on low-income earners, in particular through electricity prices.
The affordability of it. This is Australia, an energy-rich nation in the 21st century, where we see people on low incomes, and I acknowledge that there are subsidies, but those subsidies go nowhere near compensating for the price of energy. We see people on low incomes, pensions and so forth, having to compromise their standard of living, having to go without a meal perhaps a day, or having to sit in front of their television with a blanket over their knees because they can't afford to turn on a heater or whatever the case may be. There is something wrong with the pricing structure. There is something wrong in the way in which prices are determined for power. I believe strongly that corporatisation and privatisation of essential services is simply abrogation. We see governments across the spectrum encouraging us all to engage in energy-saving practices such as lower wattage light globes and turning off the lights and not using the air conditioners. And people generally respond well to that, as they did to water conservation. Well, they could be forgiven for asking themselves, having practiced all these economies, why are they now paying twice the amount for electricity they were 12 months ago? And it is that needs to be examined.
According to Phil Koperberg, the so-called competitive energy market was producing perverse outcomes with no consumer protection from IPART, the Independent Pricing and Regulatory Tribunal.
I was amazed to hear that one power station, which has passed its use-by date, so to speak, produces energy at the cost of somewhere in the order of $15 per megawatt hour and passes it on at $45 per megawatt hour. Now, the disparity in the pricing structure there clearly indicates that there is something radically wrong.
Well, that's the market. That's the competitive market.
Well, the competitive market...
You are ideologically opposed to a competitive market.
The competitive market serves a whole range of purposes, but where it comes to matters of livelihood, where it comes to matters of people having to decide whether to turn a heater on or not, then it doesn't have a place.
You're a socialist.
I may well be a socialist, and if that's the tag attributable to socialism, then I'm happy to say that people in Australia in the 21st century are entitled to a prudent use of energy without it costing them their standard of living.
Phil Koperberg, 67, says he will not be standing as an independent at the election. For the moment, he remains a member of the Australian Labor Party, or, if you prefer Labor Senator Doug Cameron's recent critical characterisation,
we don't want zombie politicians.